Oh, hello there. So hopefully you enjoyed that video all about classical conditioning. If you haven't seen it yet, what are you doing? You gotta watch that one first, because that's gonna teach you about classical conditioning. This video's gonna test you. And what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be showing you 4 different scenarios, and then you're gonna have to answer 2 questions for each one. So let's get right into it. So in this first scenario, what you're gonna see is that Mr. B's just enjoying a random day, watching stuff on his projector, when he realizes that there's a pizza that's been sitting out for a few days, and it looks alright. So he tries a little bit of it, and looks like it gave him a bit of food poisoning and made him sick. Now, Mr. B doesn't learn his lesson. So later on, a few days later, when he's sitting around, feeling a little hungry, he's trying to think about what to order, he thinks, maybe pizza. But then just the thought of pizza, makes him not feel good. So what I want to know is, what do we call it when you start to feel, not so good when you eat something that's not so good? So what did we call it when Mr. B got food poisoning? Now, hopefully, what you chose was the unconditioned response, because again, unconditioned essentially just means that it's unlearned. It is a natural response. And when we have food poisoning, when we eat something that's not good for us, it makes us sick. So that's an unconditioned response. Now, later on, what we found is just the mere thought of pizza made Mr. B not feel very good. So what is the exact term that we call that, specifically with food? So hopefully what you picked was taste aversion. And this is one of the most powerful forms of classical conditioning, where just one bad experience with a food can have you off that food forever. So hopefully that first scenario wasn't too tricky. Now we're on to scenario number 2. And as you can see, Mr. B is relaxing, playing on his Xbox, when suddenly his parent comes in and is screaming at him because, Mr. B, he was supposed to be cleaning his apartment this whole time, and looks like Mr. B isn't taking being yelled at very well. It's making him really upset. So again, fast forward a couple days, Mr. B's cleaned his apartment, he's relaxing, playing on his Xbox, and now his parents just coming to bring him a snack, but as you can see, just seeing his parent is making him really upset again. So what I want to know is, what is the conditioned stimulus? So hopefully what you selected for the conditioned stimulus was seeing the parent. Because initially, you see your parent, you don't really have that much of a response. But now Mr. B learned to respond to the parent in a certain way. And so this leads to my next question. What's the conditioned response? Alright, so the conditioned response to seeing the parent is getting upset, getting, crying. Because initially, when Mr. B saw his parent, he wouldn't have that much of a response. But then he learned, it was conditioned to get upset when he was seeing the parent, because he had learned to associate his parent with being yelled at. Not good. Well, it's time for scenario number 3. And as you can see, Mr. B is visiting those people in those big old white lab coats. He's getting his flu shot, and looks like it hurt. So much so that it made Mr. B cry, because sometimes they can hurt, but they are important. Now, fast forward again, Mr. B coming down, his stairs, just relaxing, and he sees that white coat, and it makes him upset just seeing the white coat. So what I'm wondering in this scenario, what was the neutral stimulus? Now, hopefully, if you recall correctly, the neutral stimulus in this situation would be a white coat. Because initially, you don't really respond to it. It's not until you associate it with something, until you're conditioned with it, that it brings out this response. I mean, it looked like that white coat was always in Mr. B's house, but it wasn't until he associated it with something that it brought out a response. So initially, it'd be a neutral stimulus. Now, fast forward, now, whenever Mr. B sees anything that's like, looks a little bit like a lab coat, it makes him freak out. So what do we call that when an individual kind of sees various stimulus and has a response to it? Now, hopefully what you selected is that this is stimulus generalization, because it's not necessarily a lab coat, but anything that looks like a lab coat that is bringing out that response. So it's generalized. This is different from stimulus discrimination, because then that would be that Mr. B would only respond to someone wearing a lab coat. We're almost done. It's time for scenario number 4. And in this scenario, Mr. B, just relaxing, chilling, and aw, Jake, his cat. Oh, but it looks like Mr. B might be a little allergic to cats. Every time he's petting Jake, it's causing him to sneeze. He must be allergic to cats. So, fast forward a couple days, Mr. B's just relaxing, reading a book about cats, and it looks like just seeing a picture of a cat now is causing Mr. B to sneeze. That's a little bizarre. So, what I want to know about this scenario is, what is the unconditioned response? Alright, so the unconditioned response for this scenario is sneezing because of the cat. So having an allergic reaction to a cat, because it's unlearned, it's unconditioned, it's an automatic response. You're not taught to sneeze by seeing a cat. It's what your body does automatically. But then, what I'm curious about is, what is the conditioned response? Now, hopefully what you picked is that it was sneezing to the picture of the cat. Because unlike sneezing to an actual cat, which is just an allergic reaction, it's automatic, it's unconditioned, sneezing to the picture was learned. It was associated with a cat, and therefore it is a conditioned response. But those are all of the scenarios, so I hope that that was simple for you. I hope that this makes sense. Again, the way to look at this is you have either conditioned or unconditioned. If it's unconditioned, another way to look at that is that it is unlearned. It's an automatic response. If you have something that's conditioned, on the other hand, it means that it was learned, which usually means that it is associated with some sort of unconditioned response or unconditioned stimulus. And then the only differences between stimulus and response is that a stimulus is something that essentially happens to us, something that brings about then how we respond. And if you can remember those 4 things, you're golden for classical conditioning.